Okay, Peter. So there were a couple of announcements on the Fury Joshua thing, but not enough to really hang a sort of chat about it on. But I'll give you those in a second. But I just wanted to talk about Fury Joshua and the four belt era, because while I was looking for information on the fight, and then we get this drip feed eternally, which never seems to materialise into anything definite, I just thought I'd look at what is constantly said. This will be the first ever fight for the undisputed heavyweight title of the world, where all four belts are going to be contested. And this is often thrown around, and it's thrown around more and more. I mean, Clarissa Shields is often saying, she's the first woman ever to, get all four belts, a woman to have all four belts at the same time. And Josh Taylor has obviously got a really great fight against Jose Ramirez coming up on the 22nd of May. And that is for all four belts as well. And, they keep saying this is the first time in the history of boxing, or if they want to be more dramatic, in the history of the world, that all four belts will be contested at the same time, and there'll be one person who holds all four belts. Now, this is true, but I just wanted to break down a bit really what it meant. And talking about, going back to the Fury Joshua thing, which is going to be for all four belts, and will be the first time there will be an undisputed heavyweight champion who holds all four belts. We're now hearing that the site fee has been agreed, $150 million. This was a report in ESPN.com on Saturday. So the Saudis are putting up £150 million site fee. So a bit of sports washing going on there again, if you want to look at it that way. That site fee is going to be split pretty much 50-50 between Joshua and Fury, so $75 million a piece. It doesn't sound like there'll be a lot of money left for the undercard, as happens in these fights, but everybody will tune in for the main event anyway. And then, from there, there's all going to be all the pay-per-view and everything else. But it looks like they're going to pocket £75 million a piece. Eddie Hearn, as always, is being quite tight-lipped about this. I think he realises that people have had their hopes up and down so many times. Eddie doesn't say a lot, but Bob Arum, who's his partner in this, representing Fury, says that it looks like Jeddah on either the 24th or the 31st of July, or possibly the 7th of August. So there's never one answer to any question about Joshua Fury. There's always a number. But it looks like, it is getting a bit closer. It looks like it's going to be in Jeddah. It looks like it's being July, August. I don't know what they're going to do about the heat, but I suppose with that amount of money, you could even sort the sun out. So that looks like that's going to happen. And this will be for all four belts. And for anybody that doesn't know, Fury is the WBC champion, having taken that title from Deontay Wilder in February last year. And Joshua holds the IBF, the WBO, and the WBA belts. So the winner will walk away with all four belts and the title of undisputed champion. But what relevance do all four belts have? Well, I think, I know I'm preaching to a lot of people who know about this, and some people who are completely confused by it. So it's difficult to pick a middle path when you're just coming out with all these acronyms. But just to give people a brief rundown, the WBA, which came out of the National Boxing Association of America, the NBA, National Boxing Association of America, can trace its roots back to 1921. So the WBA started really in 1962. So it was really an American organisation, focused on American fighters, but obviously claiming to be global. So if you were WBA champion, you were the world champion. The WBC came along very shortly afterwards. That was formed in 1963, and that was formed in Mexico and has operated out of Mexico City ever since. So the WBC, I suppose, in many ways is regarded as the premier belt by a lot of fighters. It's the one that all fighters want to have. They've had lots of great champions in the past. It's a good-looking green belt as well. It's very noticeable. So, you have the WBC as well. You have the IBF. Now, the IBF came about in 1983. They came about from the United States Boxing Association, which again had been more American-centric. And it was a guy called Bob Lee who wanted to become president of the WBA. The WBA said, no, you're not going to be president. Bobby said, well, okay, I'll go off and start my own organisation, the IBF. First great champion with that was Larry Holmes. Now, Larry Holmes really pioneered the IBF because he was annoyed with the WBA and WBC. He said, okay, don't need you. I'll take the IBF belt. But everybody knew that Larry was the champion. So, the IBF belt, took a little while to gain a bit of traction. But eventually came to have as much credence as the other two. So therefore you had three belts. So we lived for a long time in a three-belt era. Then the WBO came along. They started in 1988 in Puerto Rico. Now the WBO for a long time were kind of second tier. People of my vintage will remember, the Eubanks and the Ben fights for the WBO middleweight title and the WBO super middleweight title, and obviously with Watson in there as well, and finally Steve Collins. But interestingly enough, while we were going on, it's for the World Championship, and the WBO were sanctioning these people. Like I say, it was a second-tier belt. When Ben and Eubank were fighting for the world middleweight title, the WBO world middleweight title, people like Michael Nunn and James Toney were kind of laughing at them in America and giving it, these guys are not in our league, So, but it was a useful sort of jumping off point for them. It gave them that tag, and what it's all about is the selling tag. This is for a world title, but sometimes it has as much validity as the South Moreton Boxing Club world title. So you've got to kind of pick through this. And the reason we're now entering into this 4-belt era, and sorry, while I said that jokingly about the South Moreton Boxing Club heavyweight title, there are lots of periphery titles under what I'm going to call first tier titles. Those 4 first tier titles of WBA, WBC, WBO and IBF. There's also the IBO. If you remember, Vladimir Klitschko very often represented the IBO, was their heavyweight champion for a long time, would come in proudly with his WBA and IBO belts. Ricky Hatton for a long time was WBU champion, until he got that chance at Costa Azul and the WBA belt. So there have been sort of worthy people tagged to these belts, but nobody's really taken them seriously. They haven't really broken through. I'm not going to name all the other, because I'll just confuse myself, all the other sort of alphabet belts that are out there. But the WBO in recent years seem to have elevated themselves, through persistence, through having good long-term champions, to what we will call first tier. So now we arrive at the current era where we have 4 first tier belts. Now these guys very rarely work together. The reason they don't work together is they all work on a commission basis. And so what they're saying is, we'll license you to be our champion, we'll rank you to be our champion, and sometimes how the rankings are come to is a bit opaque. Bob Arum, incidentally, has said in the past that to get his fighters ranked, he had to pay like a straight bribe to the WBA to get his fighters ranked, and it's still very murky about how these things happen. But they sanction people. If you become their champion, every time you fight, you have to pay a percentage of your purse to them. So I think it's about, it's between, and I think the WBA came in with something like 3%, the WBA something like 5%, but it's a small percentage of your purse. But it's obviously still a significant chunk of your purse, because your world title fights, you're not going to have that many of them, and even if you're a special fighter, and they're going to be the biggest purses of your life. So you've got to give that to the sanctioning bodies. So obviously it's very difficult to appease all 4 sanctioning bodies, because they want you to fight regularly so they can take a cut of your purse. And if you're going to get your big purse, even if it's 75 million, if you've got to give 5% to 4 different people, I mean, that soon adds up to 20%. So I'm sure, they've done some deals behind the scenes to do this, but that's the reason. And that's also the reason why these belts will fracture very quickly, because it's very difficult to keep people who want you to pay them money regularly happy if you're not doing that, because the temptation for them is always to go and say, well, if you're not going to fight, if you're not going to give us the money, we'll go and get someone else who will. And I know this sounds anathema to boxing fans. It's like, well, how can you do that? How can you give it to someone else who will, and they haven't fought for it? Well, that's, I'm afraid, is the money behind the sport, and that's the way things break down. But they will say that, and they will then strip you of the title, pass it to someone else who will then fight for it. So that's why it is kind of exciting when we get this fight for all 4 belts, but don't expect it to last very long. But I suppose what people are looking for is clarity. And, we're constantly looking for clarity, and the argument constantly goes, why don't we get, one champion in each weight division? Well, who's going to do that, and who's going to clean up all the other belts? And I suppose really, I don't really, to go a little bit aside, Daniel Dubois in the heavyweight division is having his comeback fight on the 5th of June. Now, Dubois, all respect to him, obviously we know he got beaten by Joyce. Recently picked up that terrible eye injury. He's coming back, and he's coming back with a hard fight. So you've got to take your hats off to him. Normally, it's a get back in the ring, get your confidence back type of fight. But he's fighting a Romanian guy called Bogan Dinu. And Bogan has only had 2 losses in, I think, about 28 fights. And that was to Kubrat Pulev and a name that just escaped, but, a high-profile guy. So this is a real live opponent he's coming in for. And this is going to be, wait for it, for the WBA interim heavyweight title. So the winner of this fight will be the WBA interim heavyweight champion. Does that give you any clarity? I don't know. Well, let me tell you who the super champion is. The super champion of the WBA is Anthony Joshua. Does that make it any clearer? Well, let's go with who's the regular champion? The regular champ is a chap called Trevor Bryan. Okay, but then of course you've got the champion in recess. The WBA champion in recess, who hasn't fought since 2017, is Mahmoud Shah. And also, just to give it a bit more, they've got a gold champion who is Robert Helenius. So there you go. There's 5 different champs, of which I hope Dubois will join soon. But you can see how not only does it get confusing between the belts, now pioneered by the WBA, it gets confusing within the belts. So, we're now in this 4-belt era, oddly enough, looking for clarity. And I hope in a way that gives you an idea of why there are these 4 belts, where they've come from, and in a way what they mean. But at least we will have one tag after this fight, which you can't take away, and that will be undisputed. There will be an undisputed champ, and they will be able to claim to be the first ever undisputed champ to hold all 4 belts at the same time. But what I'm kind of trying to say is, it doesn't really mean anything. The undisputed means a lot. You know, the one undisputed champion means a lot, but the number of belts they have behind them doesn't really mean a great deal. But yeah, there's another little bit of information on Fury Joshua, another little thought about the 4-belt era coming in, Peter. So thanks for your time, and I hope I haven't over acronymed you out of the day.